people who need it. So let me see. So just to get started, here's a question for everybody. I want you to stop and think, like, what are some of your financial goals for the next 3 years? And if you are able to use the chat feature and just throw out some thoughts there, we're monitoring the chat and we can share with everybody. And I mean, how many of you are actually planning ahead that far, like that have goals for the next 3 years? Someone says to pay off their mortgage. Someone else says to keep saving for retirement. Some aspect of retirement for at least my husband, but no concrete plan. That's always hard when you're like an entrepreneur too. Have enough money not to have to work again. I hear that. Someone else said buying a car. Those are all great answers. So I don't know, Soapy. Oh, someone else said helping their kids. That is a huge goal. Down payment for the next house. So Soapy, is it still my turn or are you going for the next one? Soapy. I think we can go to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself because situations.
Oh, I understand. I have children at home as well.
All right. So this is your part, and and then the next section, how debt works, I will take.
Okay, thank you. So basically, whenever you're trying to set goals, like it could be for the next 6 months, 12 months, or 3 years, like we just talked about, and those are pretty lofty goals that you have to plan for. Part of that is understanding how to manage your debt and credit so that you can achieve the goals that you have in mind. And so that's what we're going to be focused on today, is talking about managing your debt. So can anybody tell us what is the difference between credit and debt? You can take a guess. There's no penalty if you don't get it right. If we were in person, I totally would give you a gold star or a piece of candy if you got it right. Aren't they the same thing? Good question, Tammy. Not exactly. So debt is not the same as credit. Debt is actually money that you owe and have to pay back. Oh, someone else said the answer flashed on the screen. Yes, it did. We're on the next slide now. So credit is the ability to borrow money. So basically you use credit to borrow money, which then turns into debt that you have to pay back. So they are related and they're very similar, but they're not exactly the same thing. So going further into that concept, can anybody tell us what the difference is between a creditor and a debtor? Creditor is whom you borrow money from. That's correct. And so that would mean that the debtor is the person who owes money. So you guys are following along nicely. Thank you. So what you need to know is when you owe debt, you need to know who you owe it to. You need to know how much you owe them, how much the payments are, when the payments are due, and other important facts. And it seems straightforward and simple, but when you get to a point in your life where you might have student loans, as Soapy mentioned earlier before we got started, you might have medical debt. You may have thought you paid it all off and it can come back to haunt you sometimes. That's happened before where people thought they had paid off a loan, especially with car loans, and there might be a certain payoff amount that they have to do in order to kind of close it out. And then next thing you know, like that can come back up years later where they thought it was paid off and they pull their credit report and they see there's still some small lingering amount. And sometimes that can trigger a collection. notice if they didn't realize that they owed that money and it just kind of lingered and no one was able to get in touch with them. So these are all things that can be tricky, and it's something that you need to stay on top of. So we're going to go into some strategies and thoughts of how to help with that. So people can get into debt for many reasons. Again, like someone mentioned, their goal was to purchase a new car or to buy their next home. Purchasing large assets like that are obviously long-term debt that usually people have to go into an arrangement to pay off over a fixed amount of time. And that leads to like taking out credit, or having just not necessarily credit cards, but credit in general, allowing you to take out a loan. People get into debt because they have to pay bills, and bills can pile up. And if you don't have enough income and cash flow to cover the bills that you have, that can set you back. Covering unexpected expenses, that's always tough, especially somebody mentioned having enough over the next 3 years to help out their children. I know as a parent, my kids are pretty young, but I mean, we've all been children and grown into young adults. And sometimes like unexpected things can come up when you have kids. I mean, anything from health emergencies to just, mistakes that happen that become learning experiences. I know one time I backed out of the garage, and when I was first learning how to drive, and I ended up like ripping off the side mirror of my mom's car. And I'm sure that was like an unexpected expense. I'm glad insurance, I think, covered it at that point. But that's my point. You just never know. These just add a little bit of things you can't plan when you have kids. Buying something they want or need. So that's something hopefully you can plan ahead for, like if you have a large expense, like a car that you want to buy and you need a car. But that can put you into debt if you haven't set that money aside in advance. So these are all things, just examples. And debt can affect your financial situation in the sense that you need to use your future income to pay your debts. So the deeper you get into debt, if you're not like incrementally increasing the amount of cash you have coming in, maybe from like a job or pay raises that happen hopefully to cover cost of living, that kind of thing, obviously it's going to just sink you deeper into debt and you won't be able to pay it off. Generally paying interest and sometimes fees on your debt until paid. So whenever you take out a loan or credit, there's always interest charges unless you get one of those special deals where you have a fixed amount of time to pay off the credit card before the interest kicks in. Usually the interest will catch up to you, and you have to be really aware when you sign off on accepting credit offers. Carefully look at the interest rates, because if they're really high interest rates, sometimes you think you're paying down the principal and it just keeps adding up because the interest is piling on top. And also debt can affect your finances in that it can impact how soon you can achieve your goals. Especially when you're talking about, again, like big long-term goals of like buying a house or a car. So many people want to buy a home, but it takes time to build up your credit history and to have a good history of paying off your debts that prove that you are able to handle a large amount of money as far as a loan and paying it back. So those are things to keep in mind. So the key takeaway from this first part is just understanding the different types of debt. And I'm just curious, well, I can't ask you, I don't really want to ask you like how many of you have different types of debt, like credit cards or medical bills or student loans, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind so that you can understand the different types of debt. And we'll talk about the first steps toward managing it.
Okay, so the next section is going to go into how debt works. So I wouldn't be able to see the chat since I'm screen sharing, Kara, so you'd have to help me here. I'm going to just ask everybody to type in what you think is the answer. These are very basic questions, but some people get confused by them. So how much money you borrow is called what? A, principal, B, interest, or C, fees? If you could just type in the chat.
Looks like people are generally getting it right away. They know that it's the principal.
Okay, excellent.
Some smart folks in the audience here.
Yeah. The main cost of borrowing money is referred to what? current balance, B, interest, or C, credit?
It's like I'm seeing everybody's got the right answer so far. It's B.
Good. And I think this is the last one. A loan with no collateral is called A or and what? A, secured loan, B, unsecured loan, C, mortgage.
Everybody is 100% right so far. Unsecured.
Okay, you pass. We're done. So I wanted to talk about revolving credit. These are things like credit cards. You do have a credit limit. When you get credit cards, they give you a certain amount up to, and it could be anything, again, all dependent upon your credit background, your history and report and scores. For students, it could be anywhere. Like they usually, lure you with, hey, you can get up to $500 of credit as a student. But as you get older, you can get as high as 20, 25,000. If you have a business, even, a larger credit limit. But it is the most you can borrow, and you don't want to borrow the most that you can borrow. You try to limit it, to a smaller percentage. Payment is based on credit that you have used. So when you have a credit card, however much you had used from the credit that the credit card company gives you, that would be called the payment. And then minimum payment is often 1 to 5% of the outstanding balance. If the more you pay and the sooner you pay it off, you pay less interest. And, as Kara had mentioned, sometimes these companies, they lure you with these 0% promo interest rates, et cetera. But you have to be very careful with them. If you don't pay back within the allotted time given, usually 12 to 18 months, then you're going to end up paying a lot more, interest than you would if you, paid everything on time. And the other thing is, once you have the credit card, the second thing they lure you with is, hey, you can transfer all of your other credit balances, right, to this one credit card. And, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, right? I'll admit it. I have used those offers, when I was just out of college and, I was only working for a couple of years, I had a lot of debt, and I couldn't afford a lot of things. And so I ended up getting 3 or 4 different credit cards. And, I didn't want to not be able to enjoy some of the, things that my friends were doing, for example. And so I did it and I used it, some of the furniture back then, and I'm sure they have it now too. But, it's like, hey, if you buy this furniture, we'll give you 0% interest rate for 6 months, and, I think there must have been one point where I couldn't pay it off within 6 months. And so it was pretty high interest rate. It was like 25% or something. And so I did utilize some of those promotional, transfer things to get rid of kind of anything that was high interest rate. And we'll go a little bit into the different types of payment methods that can be used, to eventually knock down your debt to zero, hopefully. So fees, when you're taking out loans or if you have a credit card, these are additional charges. They are not interest. These fees could be anything from late fees to some sort of a transaction fee. I remember when I did some of those transfers, I had to provide them like a 3%, payment to transfer some of my balances from one credit card, to the other. And so they can add up. Make sure you understand, the fees that you will be charged and the fees that you may be charged. So the key takeaway here is, you want to consider how debt works so you can make those informed decisions about it. And reducing debt is Kara's turn.
Great. So yes, we've talked a lot about understanding your debt and the different types of debt. So here's some strategies for reducing your debt. there's two different methods that we'll cover today. And one of those two is called this high cost, or actually it's called the snowball method, which allows you to pay off the high cost debt first. Basically, you want to have a plan of attack that's going to help you get out of the debt, right? In a fixed amount of time, especially if you have a goal, like within the next 3 years to maybe purchase a large purchase. You basically have to decide like if it is worth it and if you have the means to pay off that high cost debt first. So I think we can go to the next slide because it kind of goes deeper into it. The advantage to it is like basically you would make a list of all the different debt that you have, anything from like credit cards to medical. It could be your mortgage, it could be a car loan, just any kind of debt. And you would then highlight the ones that have the highest cost. So basically highest to lowest, and then you would just start paying down that high debt first. And after you pay the first one off, you just make an extra payment on the next debt on the list and continue as needed. So basically you're like doubling up on your payments without regard to like the interest amount. Well, are we taking a look at the interest amount with this too, Sophie? That's where I might need a little reinforcement here. Sorry, you're muted.
I'm sorry. There's going to be a case scenario actually that we'll go through, and
Okay.
it'll better explain what these two different types of methods mean.
So let's go to that next slide. So the snowball method is the other alternative, and that could help you pay your debt down faster than the high cost method, because if you're focused on the higher cost, like total amount of your debt, and you're trying to double up payments as much as you can, it still might take you longer to pay that off. Whereas if you're looking at the lowest balance first, you might be able to like pay more like toward it, like your payment will go further basically to getting rid of the overall debt. So you would basically make an extra payment to the first debt on your list that is the lowest, and after you pay off that first debt, continue to the next highest balance, and so on and so forth. I think the case studies are definitely going to help. So this is one of our case studies to reduce debt. I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, it took Brian some time to find a new job offer after the hospital where he worked closed, but his new job at a medical supply warehouse makes great use of his skills. He likes the people he works with. Now that he has a steady paycheck and has some money saved for an emergency, he can start to reduce his debts. Ultimately, he made a list of his debts, and those debts included credit card debt that accumulated during his period of unemployment, his car loan, and medical debt from when he was in the hospital a few years back. So his debt goes back a ways. His sister went through a similar financial situation. She told him about the high cost debt first method and the snowball method of reducing debt. Brian wants to complete his worksheets to get a better sense of how each method works. And his sister used the snowball method. Brian wants to use whichever method will help him save money. So before we go on to the next, does anybody have a guess at which method might help him save money based off of his situation? You can use the chat. I know it's a little bit tough, and if you don't know, that's fine. All right, I think we'll go on to the next slide and hopefully offer some clarification here. Do you want to move to the next slide, Sophie? Okay, so basically the high cost debt method, this is him going through the exercise where he's listed out his credit card debt of $8,000, and see how he put the interest rate next to each one. You could do this on your own with your own debt and fill in the blanks, but he had hospital debt that he mentioned from a few years back, which was $10,000, and he's looking at the interest rate, which is 10%. And then he had his car loan, which is $2,000 and 6%. And interestingly enough, he's not looking at the time period, because usually car loans have a fixed time frame where you have to pay them off, but he's really looking at it from listing the highest to the lowest interest amount. And I think he's going to plan to pay off the high debt first. So we could go to the next slide. Now, but if he did the snowball method, then the opposite is what he's going for, because the car loan, he's not so much looking at interest rate, but he's looking at the car loan being $2,000, and that's like the smaller amount without taking interest into account. He's looking at the credit card, which is 8,000, and then the next highest amount, which is the hospital bill, of 10,000, and that's actually his oldest debt, I think, or maybe the credit card was the oldest, but either way, you can go to the next slide. Oh, so actually, before we move on to that slide, does anybody, now that you've seen both methods, have a guess at which method is going to help him save money as opposed to paying the debt off faster? Does it? I see it's like quiet. So, oh, we got the snowball method. Seems like paying the highest interest rate would save. Higher interest rate first. I will say if he's trying to save money, yes, paying off that higher interest rate first is probably the best way to do it, because the longer you keep that debt lingering with that high interest rate, the more you're going to pay on the loan over time. So you guys who guessed higher interest rate first got it right. Now, if his goal was to just pay off his debt faster, then he might want to do the snowball method and start with that lower amount, because if he has enough income coming in where he can just knock that low dollar amount out first, then his overall total will be whittled down faster. So, you know, you really have to kind of look at all of those angles of like your interest rate, your total amount, and like what the time frame is for your goals. Carol says there's great satisfaction in paying off a smaller debt. Psychological. I agree with you. I have to say sometimes it's not like the smartest method if I have a certain goal in mind to pay off the smaller amount first, but you're right. I know the times I've paid off a car loan, you just feel like, oh, that's one less bill I have to worry about until something happens and then the car breaks and you need a new car. So, but hopefully, you know, if you've paid off that car loan and you're able to get enough use out of it, and that might be your lowest debt, you can put some money aside. I was always told, even if you only have one car and you're a 2-car family and you're only paying on one car loan because you paid off one, it's a smart thing to still continue as if you had 2 cars and put that money aside in a savings account that you would have been paying on that other car loan, so that you have it handy for the next time you need to buy a car or other expenses. Carol has a question. Do banks still do consolidation loans to combine higher interest rates? Let me just, it kind of flashed there. I just want to read the whole thing again. Do banks still do consolidation loans to combine higher interest debts into one smaller interest obligation? Yes, and I mean, it's not necessarily that the banks present it that way, but a lot of people will do things like take on a certain type of loan, like Sophie mentioned, where sometimes credit cards will offer a certain time frame of the 0% interest. And then you might say, I'm going to open this credit card specifically to transfer my other high interest rate credit cards to that 0 interest credit card, knowing that then within the offer time frame, which, like I think you said 12 to 18 or 12 to so many months, you have to pay that off to get the benefit of it, where you're not paying interest. Otherwise, once that interest rate kicks in, you're going to be owing a lot more money. And similarly, sometimes people look at, if they have a home, sometimes they'll take out a home equity line of credit and use that to pay off debt that might be higher interest. And that's more of a form of paying the high debt off first, you know, based off an interest rate, as opposed to the snowball method of paying the smaller amount first. Did that answer your question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, you know, I feel like every other day or once a week, I get a letter from some sort of a loan consolidation company, you know, that says, hey, you know, you have all this debt. Call us, we'll take care of you. We'll, you know, we'll pay off all your higher interest debts, and, you know, and you'll have less to pay, and blah, 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 blah. We'll actually go into that a little bit. Banks necessarily don't do that. They're usually, I think, more sketchier companies that would offer that sort of a solution. So, we'll go into that in a little bit, but yeah, typically banks, we're a federally insured institution. We have ethics, that we have to abide by, and we don't try to hurt, or harm people, by making some of these offers that we've seen in the companies, because if you think about it, there are so many different fees involved, right? If you read the fine print, that ultimately you'll end up paying the company some sort of a fee to help consolidate that debt, versus it going towards actually paying off the debt that you have.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sophie. Predatory lenders are something everybody needs to be aware of. And I know, like you said, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So this is some example of some places where you could turn to if you had questions, like Carol just raised about consolidation of loans and such. I mean, you could always ask your local bank. There are people at Enterprise Bank who can offer help like that if you were to contact a branch near you. But basically, there's also nonprofit credit card counseling organizations. And if you were to just do a Google search, unfortunately, we can't recommend any specific one. But if you did a Google search, there are definitely some even local based ones. And you kind of want to just double check that they're with the Better Business Bureau, or like what their ratings are, just to make sure that they're legit. If they're asking, like Sophie said earlier, if they're asking you to pay a fee to them for them to help you pay down your debt, then that's probably a red flag, because you want all of the money that you're making to go toward your debt, not toward paying somebody for something that you could honestly probably do on your own with just a little bit of research and assistance of information. And then the other option is to go to USA.gov and search for credit counseling. And there'll be tips from the Federal Trade Commission. Again, like a credible financial institution, like we definitely abide by the FTC guidelines in everything that we do. So we're not out to cause harm, like Sophie said. And again, you want to choose your help carefully. Debt settlement companies, we kind of just covered this, they offer to make deals with your creditors. So again, just make sure you ask about fees in the process up front. And you can always say no if something doesn't feel right. Definitely don't proceed. Debt consolidation loans, like Carol asked about, is when you use one loan to pay off multiple debts. And so you definitely want to be focused on looking at the interest rates and the fees and other costs, and also like the time frame allotted for you to pay off the loans if you're consolidating like that. I know, like, for example, I have student loans, so I've consolidated mine and it ended up saving me money because I was able to get a lower rate by consolidating my loans, and the time frame was spread out more. But that's something that I had to research and talk to a few different people about before I could come to a conclusion of what was a good solution for me. So that's kind of stuff you have to spend time on. So basically, these are things you want to watch out for. This is a nice checklist. This is worth taking a screenshot of if you're able to, or if it's something that anybody would like, we can always send it out after the fact. But these are the questions that you would ask if you're looking for help, like we've outlined in the last slide. That's interesting red flag worth mentioning, like if the company you're working with to help you with your debt is saying for you not to communicate directly with the creditors while they negotiate a better deal for you, that is a red flag. Ultimately, you should be able to talk to the people you owe debt to. I mean, if you've already been talking to them, and you want to be in the loop of what the agreements are. So just having conversations is not going to break some kind of agreement that you put in place. You can actually call and negotiate an agreement on your own behalf, honestly, without somebody doing that for you. And if they tell you to stop making payments on your debt while they negotiate a better deal, that's a huge red flag. If they encourage you to take advantage of a new government program, like Sophie said, if you get mail, this is new government program, or emails, I've seen emails like that too, to bail you out of debt, that's probably a red flag, because they know that's language that might get your attention, but it's not necessarily true. So the key takeaway from this was just helping you to understand, like, you really need to do some research and develop a plan to reduce your debt. And like I said, get help if needed. There's plenty of local options in most banks or credit unions, or just Googling debt solutions nearby, but double checking their Better Business Bureau ratings and reviews to make sure that they're legitimate. For credit counseling is a good first step.
Good. I'll take this section, and this is just going into how non-payment of debts and debts in collection can impact things for you. So in terms of the life cycle of a debt, when you see things on the credit report, for example, that says you're current, it just means that you have debt, but you're paying on time and you're paying as agreed. So that's current, and that could lead to the debt being paid off faster and on time. If it's not current, it means that you're missing payments, and so you're going to be delinquent on those debts. You might see some terminology, on your credit reports that could say in default, or if there's a charge off, that leads to collections. So what that means is the company will send it over to a collection agency. So it's more of a third party, and they will be calling you probably nonstop until they get some sort of a response from you to pay the debt, or it's assigned or sold to a debt collector. So you have to be careful, in making sure that you don't miss your payments. So these are the different things that can happen if you do pay your debts. The first item, generate late fees or pay more money in interest. A lot of us bankers, we like to save money as much as we can, and so whenever I miss a payment and I get that late fee, it's like, oh man, that's like $35. I could have, treated my kid or, saved it for something. And especially if the balance is like so low, to have to pay $35 for like a $100 debt. I mean, that's 35% interest right there. So, so that can happen. You can be contacted by a debt collector, as mentioned, before. You could lose services or pay costs to reestablish them. So, that could be like internet service or phone service, or, God forbid, electricity or gas during, the winter. Sometimes we're not as fortunate, I think, where I guess there's a restriction, for some companies to turn off our electricity or gas. But a lot of people, that does happen to them. And I think because of the pandemic, I think the government has stepped in to make sure that that's not happening as it should, because, people are without jobs and et cetera. So just be careful. You could lose collateral. And so what that means is, if you took out a secured loan, so that means that, you took out a loan and let's say you put up your car as collateral. If you don't make those payments on time, you're going to lose your car. Sometimes people will put a house, your house, and it could be like a student loan or something, and that's collateral. If the loans aren't going to be paid, the bank could go after your house, and obviously you don't want that to happen. There's going to be negative entries on your credit reports, which would result in a drop of credit scores. You could get lawsuits from creditors, and with these lawsuits, there's, it could cost you a lot of money in the long run. So try to stay away from that. Wage garnishment, wage garnishment is when you're, you're working and, because you haven't been paying a certain debt, or let's say taxes, just as an example, or it could be child support, or it could be, a number of different things, but they're all your responsibility. So if you have that happening, your income can be kind of diverted, to the company to pay for your non-payments. And then account garnishment is very similar. They can go kind of into your savings or checking account through something called a levy, and they could take, some money out as well. And then a treasury offset. So if you're expected to get a refund of, let's say, $2,000, and you did not pay your educational loans or some other loans, and it was reported, instead of getting that refund's gonna, gonna be turned around, and let's as an example, it'll go towards the Department of Education, instead. And I'm saying that because of firsthand experience with my husband. So that does happen, and it will happen, as long as you don't pay your debts. I mean, I've kind of controlled that a little bit now, but it's
Yep.
a struggle, right, in the beginning, as a lot of people could be going through some hardships, and we just can't pay off certain things on time, and those things do happen. So I see a
Yeah.
few.
There's some comments. I can read them. And I also say, like, as far as the student loans, I know someone who like transferred schools and didn't realize they had an outstanding debt from the first school they went to until they were expecting a tax return. And then, like you said, Sophie, they didn't get it because it went to pay that loan off. And then it was like an alert, like, oh, I need to go back and look at my credit debt and see what I owe. And it was a good learning experience, but it's good to avoid that if you can. So some of the comments here say, Carol, wow, it's lots of comments. Carol says, I am mostly good about paying on time. Thank goodness for auto payments, but automated payments, that's a good tip. You can set up a budget and then set a set amount that will automatically come from your account to pay that bill each time it's due without you having to think about it. But she says in December, she legitimately forgot to set up payment for Christmas card gifts or Christmas gifts and charged to save money at the cash register. She called the creditor and asked if they'd forgive the late payment if I paid it in full. It wasn't a large amount, and they agreed. She thinks if it's a regular payment you miss and have been a good payer, like you have a good history with them, they will also forgive one late payment over the course of so many months. It's always worth asking. That's such a helpful tip. I totally agree, and I've been in that situation too. So another person says, I have a friend in Tennessee who was denied a job at the sheriff's department due to negative entries on the credit report and low credit score. The thinking was that high debt and bad credit could make them susceptible to bribes. That's true. A lot of places do a credit check before you can accept employment with them for different reasons. So that's something to keep in mind as far as managing your debt and not ignoring it. And other people have heard the same thing. So that's really good, helpful conversation.
Yeah, no, that's good. And at banks, we always look at credit history as well when we're in the process of hiring. And I think I was like, I don't know, in 27 years old or something when I first got the bank job, but during the process, there were a couple of instances where I got a phone call and said, hey, this is on your credit report, how come, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that, they're not going to hire me because I have a couple of items on the credit report, but they want to see whether or not you have that kind of character where you're going to be responsible for it, and you're going to, look for ways of paying for it or paying it down or whatever. And so, and so I had to work through a couple of things before I can work at the bank. And a lot of different companies do that. So, I think it's as long as you have a plan to work through some of those situations, it's okay.
Yeah. One other thing
And then
worth
too many
mentioning.
credit checks.
Yeah, too many credit checks can
Go ahead.
lower your credit score. Someone commented that that's a red flag. And debt to income ratio, like we were talking about why you might want to pay down your debt. You might be fine with having the debt, but then if someone's looking at debt to income ratio, like how much you owe versus how much you have available for credit, that can keep you from buying a car or a house. The other thing I wanted to say that reminded me is like identity theft can happen. Actually, I had that happen where there was some loans taken out in my name that I didn't realize until I went to apply for a job, and they ran my credit report and they're like, what's this? And I was like, I don't know. And so I had to like research and dispute it. And so that's another reason to stay on top of your credit, your debts, because people can oftentimes take your identity and open up loans in your name without you realizing it. So something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Thank you. Okay, so before making a plan to pay a debt, you want to make sure you know that you owe the debt, that, you know, kind of what Kara just said, that the debt is actually yours, that the statute of limitations has not expired, and that you're dealing with a legitimate debt collector. And if you can confirm those 3 items, you want to pay the debt in full if possible. But, you know, obviously, if you can't pay in full, you can make a deal with them to see if you can do it in increments based on your ability to pay back. If payment in full is not possible, again, you know, kind of set up some sort of a payment plan and negotiate for a lower balance. As someone said, you know, it doesn't hurt to ask. You just never know what can happen that can help you. So you can, you know, hopefully settle for a smaller balance versus having to pay the full amount, the original amount that you were in debt for. So the key takeaway here is don't ignore a debt collector. Make sure any debt you're asked to pay is valid as soon as possible, and you know, get help if you need it. Let's see. So some of the summary key takeaways: understanding your debt is the first step to managing it. Consider how debt works so you can make informed decisions. Develop a plan to reduce your debt and get help if needed. And then don't ignore, you know, a debt collector, as mentioned in the last one. Okay, so is anybody interested in us going through just a little bit, you know, of maybe information on medical debt and student loan debt? I know we have like 12 minutes left. Would that be helpful?
You can just put a yes in the chat if you would like to hear that. Someone said, can you talk about how to set up blocks of your credit on the 3 credit bureaus and how to, oh, someone said yes, but then the chat just pops up and goes away so fast. The first one said, can you talk about how to set up blocks of your credit on the 3 credit bureaus and how to open one when you need to allow access to a credit bureau? And then a couple other people said, yes, they'd like you to go over what you just offered, Sophie.
Okay.
I can say, like,
I'm not
I
sure
have a
about
credit freeze
setting
on,
up.
I have that. I mean, this is not official advice. I'm just speaking for myself because I mentioned that like identity theft had happened to me at a young age before I even had a chance to establish my own credit and just had no idea. So what I've done, and it continues, it's funny how I get alerts sometimes that someone has tried to like open a cell phone in New York in my name or like whatever. So I have blocks set up. And what I did was I contacted the 3 credit bureaus, like you said, TransUnion, Experian, and I forget the other one off the top of my head. But basically, I was able to work with each of them directly. And if you Google them, you can find their 800 numbers, or you can do it online and set up what's called a freeze, so that ultimately, if somebody is trying to apply for credit in your name, it will automatically bounce back. Now, the only hang up with that is if you're trying to apply for something new, like you want to buy a car or something, and you go to the car dealership, you have to contact them in advance, or contact the credit bureaus in advance and let them know, like, I need this block removed for a temporary period of time so that you can have time for the people to check your credit, legitimately check your credit, and then they'll put the block back on. And I think sometimes it has like a time frame where you have to like go in and renew the block. So definitely contact the credit bureaus directly, and they can show you how to take care of that.
Okay, thank you, Kara. All right, so I'm going to breeze through the next set of slides, which has a lot of information on specifically student loans and medical debts. So student loan, obviously, it's money that you have to pay back for your education. It could be the biggest debt if, you know, maybe not the second biggest debt some people will ever have, and it could be very stressful. And it could take, you know, up 10 years usually to pay off some of those debts. What can happen if I don't repay my student loans? You can end up paying more fees and interest. That wage garnishment that was brought up earlier, that can happen. Account garnishment, treasury offset. What else can happen if it's not paid? you're unable to get more federal student aid if you're going back to school. You may need to take 1 or more semesters off. Those negative entries that mentioned earlier, a decrease in credit scores, decreased ability to borrow money, the stress of owing the money, and the delay in reaching other goals that you may have had, because you have to pay for the student loans. There are private and federal student loans. Federal student loan repayment options. There's there's a grace period. Typically, they give you until a certain time after you graduate to when you get a job, that when you can earn income to pay back. But you have to talk to somebody about it too. There's a standard repayment plan. There's a restructured payments, not based on income. So there could be kind of a graduated repayment plan or an extended one. Again, depending on what you're signed up for. You have to really read the fine print and see what are the different options that you have for repaying your student loans. Repayment plans based on income. So this is, there's several different types of plans, but there's something called a revised pay as you earn plan. There's a pay as you earn plan, and then there's a income-based repayment plan. There's income contingent repayment plan. We don't have enough time to go over, all of those in full, but I just wanted to share, some of the plans that are based on income as it relates to repayment plans. Forbearance and deferment. So forbearance means that there's a temporary postponement or reduction of payments due to financial difficulty, and deferment is the temporary suspension of loan payments for specific situations. So it's always good to ask somebody if you're in a financial hardship, to see if there's any opportunity to have any of these apply to your loan, so you don't have to pay it right now. Loan forgiveness, cancellation, and discharge. Sometimes you can get a loan forgiveness if there was a school that closed. There's a public service. Sometimes you can work, in the public sector, and there could be some sort of a loan forgiveness. Teacher loan forgiveness plan, total and permanent disability discharge due to death. So these are ways that some of these loans can, I guess, go away, in quotes. But really, you have to ask people about it, because they're not going to just offer it to you, for free. So or even just send you a letter to say that these things are happening. You have to be proactive as well. Take action to prevent default, explore a different payment due date, what are different repayment plan options, again, some of those forbearance, deferment, et cetera. And just a note at the bottom there, declaring bankruptcy does not automatically discharge federal student loans. I think people sometimes assume that, by going bankrupt, that your student loans are going to go away, but that is not the case. That's why the IRS, the Treasury Department, is able to take, your refunds and anything that you may have related to that, and pay, down your loans. Beware of student loan scams. Their scams are everywhere, and it's just such a sad world that this is happening. But students, they also get scammed. Their parents can get scammed, and so you just have to be really careful. Never pay an upfront fee. Only scammers promise fast loan forgiveness. The Department of Education seal doesn't mean it's legitimate. I remember receiving a couple of letters with that, DOE seal, and who are these people? So you have to be really careful. Never share your federal student ID number if anybody calls you, because they can access, your information and do whatever they want with it. So you have to be really careful. And the key takeaway here is when it's time to pay back your student loans, you want to consider your options and understand what will happen if you're late with payments. And your loan servicer can help you explore repayment plans. I think we tend to be in this type of culture where we're afraid of asking for help and asking for people to forgive us or help us through a process if we have hardship. But just call them and see what they can do. that's the kind of the advice we wanted to give.
You can call the
Managing a
Department of Education, literally call
Yeah.
them directly, and they can actually refer you to different places. Then you can begin your research of how to consolidate your debt or work on those different options that Sophie just presented.
Yeah. So what is medical debt? It's the result of not paying medical bills when they're due. You don't start out with debt when you receive that medical care. It's when it's not paid, that's when it becomes medical debt. Why do medical bills often turn into medical debt? Often it's unplanned, right? It could be an emergency, it could be an accident. You don't know when you're going to, fall down and twist your ankle or whatever. So these are unplanned, so you're not going to have that money saved away for these things. Total cost not known upfront. Expenses can add up quickly. It can be confusing. There are a lot of different individuals who are providing care. There's a lack of understandable detail. On the bill, it's like, what is this for? What is that for? Insurance information is often unknown. And I don't know how they can simplify the process so that these bills are easier to read. But just imagine if you don't even read English and you get all these bills and you have no idea what these bills are for. And some of the medical terminology too is like over the head for a lot of people too.
Sophie, it
yeah.
looks like we got an alert that we're getting close to the end of the hour, so we probably need to wrap it up pretty quickly.
Okay, sure. So make sure it's a bill and you owe it. If you don't owe it, dispute it. If you can't pay in full, again, try to negotiate, that lower payment, try to set up a payment plan, etc. Medical debt in collections. So unpaid medical debts appear on credit reports 180 days after the first missed payment. So that's something to be mindful of. Debts can still be referred to collections. And then for credit scores, treatment of medical debt does vary. So you have to be the key takeaway there. If you do receive a medical bill, make sure it's valid. And if you can't afford to pay it, try to set up a payment plan, or ask for some help. So I know this goes into other, like the high cost debt and stuff again, but I just wanted to provide that quickly because, it is a part of managing debt too.
Yeah, if anybody would like to connect with us afterward, we're always here. I don't know if our slide has our contact information, but you can always reach out to us. Basically, I'll tell you, my email address is kira.morehouse@ebtc.com. which stands for Enterprise Bank and Trust Company. So if I can't answer a question, I can connect you with people who can. And Sophie just put hers in the chat. So
thank you so much. And then we're going to be, we'll have these Zoom, all the videos uploaded onto the site. So if anybody missed them, they'll be up on the site pretty soon. And share it with your friends and family, because this was all great information. So thank you so much to Enterprise Bank. If anybody has any last minute questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
a lot to cover.
Yeah,
it is a lot to cover. Yeah, we've tried to separate these into 1 hour sessions, and we have a lot of other topics as well. So if you're interested, let us know.
I think it's good. It gets people thinking. So
Yeah.
that's what we want.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And let us know if we can help with anything in the future.
Great. Okay, everybody. Thank you. And happy St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.